Hi, I'm Seoyoung Jeon. I work for the UNESCO Creative City of Literature Bucheon office. Bucheon joined UNESCO Creative City of Literature in 2017 and is a proud member of this international network of cities that build traditions and a new future for each city through collaboration based on the shared goal and visions. UCCM membership granted Bucheon opportunity to create a new collaborative network with other cities and groups and organizations and engage in people-to-people exchanges. That's why we are here together. And Writer in Residence program is one of the most important international collaborations to increase mobility of writers and also promote the creativity and diversified voices in the field of literature. And Bucheon Residency, which was launched in 2020, offers 4 to 6 week stay in Bucheon for selected writers. It also provides opportunity for invited writers to participate in the city's literary scene and also to showcase their work and talent. We hope to offer local writers and audience also have chance to create this creative link and learn from each other. For today's talk, titled Pathways to Become a Literary Translator, I'm delighted to introduce 2021 Bucheon Writer in Residency, Takami Nieda. She is a Japanese-English literary translator based in Seattle, which is also our fellow UNESCO City of Literature. She also teaches writing and multicultural literature at Seattle College. Takami loves her students and is very interested in building bridges between Bucheon and the Seattle City of Literature. Takami is committed to translating literature of the Korean diaspora, specifically of writers born and or living in Japan. Her translations include Kazuki Kaneshiro's Go, which was published in March 2018, and Choi Sil's Genie's Puzzle, which will be published in next February. So pleased to have this opportunity to create the link between the two cities through the medium of literature, Go. And for this talk, we also invited the two professors teaching at the School of English, Language and Literature at the Catholic University of Korea. Here are also 3 students who are involved in a reading club. Led by Professor. It would be best to start off with everybody introducing themselves and start talking. Our guest.
Hello, again, my name is Takami Nieda. I am an instructor of writing and translation and some literature at a community college in Seattle. I'm very thrilled to be here. Any event that highlights diaspora literature and translation and anything that highlights students, I'm particularly thrilled to be a part of. So thank you for the invitation.
My name is Jeremy Knapp. As our host said, I am teaching English at the Catholic University of Korea here in Bucheon. And I have lived in Korea for about 12 years now, and I'm very privileged to be here at this wonderful event. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jiyeon Park, and I also teach at the same school. My interests are in Victorian literature in general and also in multicultural literature. So I'm really, really happy to meet you.
저는 가톨릭대학교 영어영문학부 20학번 장하영입니다. 여기 참여하게 되어서 너무 기쁩니다. 안녕하세요. 저는 백지윤이고요. 가톨릭대학교 영어영문과 17학번입니다. 오늘 이 자리에 초대해 주셔서 정말 진심으로 감사드리고 즐거운 시간 함께 보낼 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 저는 한번 영어를 해보겠습니다.
Nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Hyun Choi, who is the student in Catholic University, and my major in English language and literature. And we read this Gold novel, and we are so honor to be here to meet you. So we hope you have a great time today.
So, shall we read the selected passages first? So we selected passages from 126 to 128, 9 from the book Go. Takami, 하영장, 주현, 지현택, Jeremy, 희연, 최 in pair will read assigned each part in English and Korean respectively. Would you start first?
She told me that I scared her, I said. To be honest, I was devastated. I know what you're feeling. The cop lit up his fourth cigarette and said, looking far away, a girl once told me that I was gross. Ooh, that's harsh, I said. Just thinking about it is enough to make me want to cry, even now. It's best you forget about stuff like that, I said. Can you forget what happened tonight so easily? I shook my head. Right, said the cop. I really liked her. So did I. The young cop blew smoke out of his nose. Well, in my case, I got rejected before we even started dating. I lit another cigarette, took a deep drag, and said, I didn't give a damn when someone discriminated against me. People that hate don't understand anything you try to tell them, so I just got used to hitting them. I wasn't ever going to lose a fight, so I was okay with it. Even if people like that continue to discriminate against me, I'd probably be okay with it. I took another drag and exhaled. But ever since I met her, I've been scared as hell. It was the first time I felt that way. I guess I've never met a Japanese person that I really cared about before. In the first place, I didn't exactly know how to treat her, and what if I told her about my background and she hated me? Once I got to thinking about that, I couldn't bring myself to tell her, even when I believed she wasn't the kind of girl to be prejudiced. But I guess in the end, I didn't trust her. Sometimes I wish my skin was green or something. That way, the good people will come closer and the haters will keep their distance. That would make things so much easier. We both fell silent and each smoked a cigarette to ash.
무섭다고 그러더라고요. 솔직하게 말해서 상당히 충격받았어요. 알 것 같기도 해. 젊은 경찰은 네 대째 담배를 불을 붙이고 아련한 눈길로 말했다. 난 징그럽다는 소리를 들은 적이 있어. 그 말은 좀 심했네요. 지금도 그때 생각을 하면 울고 싶어진다니까. 빨리 잊어버리는 편이 낫겠어요, 그런 말. 그럼 너는 오늘 밤 일 빨리 잊을 수 있을 것 같니? 나는 고개를 옆으로 저었다. 그렇지? 라고 젊은 경찰이 말했다. 정말 좋아했어요. 내가 말했다. 나도 그랬어. 젊은 경찰은 코와 입으로 연기를 뿜어냈다. 하기야 뭐 내 경우에는 사귀기도 전에 차였지만 나는 새 담배에 불을 붙이고 연기를 깊이 빨아들였다가 토해내고서 말했다. 난 지금까지 차별을 당하고서도 태어났어요. 차별을 하는 놈은 대체로 무슨 말을 해도 알아듣지 못하는 놈이니까 한 대 쳐주면 그만이고 싸우는 자신이 있었으니까 전혀 아무렇지도 않았어요. 앞으로도 그런 놈들한테는 아무리 차별당해도 태어날 수 있을 거예요. 나는 또 담배 연기를 빨아들이고 토했다. 그런데 그녀를 만나고부터는 차별이 두려워졌어요. 그런 기분 처음이었어요. 난 지금까지 정말 소중하게 여길 만한 일본 사람을 만난 적이 없거든요. 그것도 내 취향에 딱 맞는 여자애는. 그래서 처음부터 어떤 식으로 사귀면 좋을지도 몰랐고 게다가 내 정체를 밝혔다고 싫다고 하면 어쩌나 하고 내심 걱정스러워서 줄곧 털어놓을 수가 없었어요. 그녀는 차별 같은 거 할 여자가 아니라고 생각하면서도. 하지만 난 결국은 그녀를 믿고 있지 않았었나 봐요. 가끔 내 피부가 녹색이나 뭐 그런 색이면 좋겠다고 생각해요. 그러면 다가올 놈은 다가오고 다가오지 않을 놈은 다가오지 않을 테니까 알기 쉽잖아요. 서로 침묵한 채 담배를 두 대째 재로 만들었다.
Pulling out another cigarette, the young cop said, I had this senpai 3 years my senior in university, a Zainichi guy named Kim-san, who everyone called Fearsome Kim. He had the fastest legs on the soccer team and was really strong. One time, he beat the hell out of some racist on the karate team, and from then on, he was called Fearsome Kim. I watched that fight. It was incredible. There wasn't a single wasted motion in his movements. I guess it was what you would call artistic. He didn't seem human. One guy took one of Kim's uppercuts in the chin and lifted off the ground. That image is burned in my memory even now. Ever since I saw that, I idolized him. How do I explain it? It had nothing to do with him being dignity. I just looked up to Kim-san. The young cop nodded again and again, muttering, he was something else, and lit his cigarette. I told the cop what I suspected might be Fearsome Kim's full name. The cop looked at me surprised and asked how I knew him. I explained to him that Fearsome Kim came to my junior high school as the new PE teacher during my second year, and that he was feared by the students. I had a friend who was horrible at math, probably couldn't recite the multiplication table, so he sure as hell wasn't going to follow the math lectures. One day, he ditched the midwinter endurance run in the PE class and was taking a nap in the classroom near the stove when Fearsome Kim appeared. The young cop listened with rapt attention. Fearsome Kim walked right up, dragged the kid to his feet by the collar, and gave him a double slap in the face that nearly tore his head off. From that moment on, my friend was a whiz at math.
새 담배를 손가락에 끼고서 젊은 경찰이 말했다. 나 대학 다닐 때 3년 선배 중에 김씨라는 제일이 있었는데 모두들 그 사람을 공부의 김씨라고 불렀어. 축구부였는데 부에서 제일 다리도 빠르고 팔힘도 세고 한 번은 그를 차별한 가라데브 놈을 반 죽여놓았는데 그때부터 공포의 김씨라 불리게 된 거야. 우연히 그 선배가 싸우는 현장을 봤는데 야, 굉장하더라. 불필요한 동작이 하나도 없는 거야. 예술적이라는 거 그런 걸 두고 하는 말일지도 모르지. 아무튼 말이야, 저건 인간이 아니란 생각까지 들더라니까. 어퍼컷을 먹은 놈의 몸이 잠시 공중에 떠 있었다니까. 지금도 눈앞에 삼삼해. 그걸 본 후로 난 김씨를 동경하게 되었어. 뭐라 잘 표현은 못하겠지만 김씨가 제일이니 어쩌니 하는 것하고는 아무 상관없이 그냥 김씨를 동경하게 되었어. 젊은 경찰은 정말 굉장했어 하면서 몇 번이나 고개를 끄덕끄덕거리고 담배에 불을 붙였다. 나는 공포의 김씨 이름을 젊은 경찰에게 말했다. 젊은 경찰은 놀라면서 어떻게 아는데? 라고 물었다. 나는 공포의 김씨가 내가 중학교 2학년 때 새로 부임해온 체육 선생이었다는 것과 우리 모두 역시 그를 공포의 김씨라 부르며 무서워했다는 말을 했다. 친구 중에 수학을 무지 못하는 놈이 있었거든요. 구구단도 제대로 못 외울 정도로. 그래서 수학 시간에 거의 진도를 따라오지 못했어요. 어느 겨울날 체육 시간이었는데 그 친구가 운동장에 안 나가고 교실 난로 앞에서 꾸벅꾸벅 졸고 있었어요. 그 자리에 공포의 김씨가 나타난 거죠. 젊은 경찰은 상당히 흥미롭다는 듯 귀를 바짝 기울였다. 공포의 김씨는 성큼성큼 그 친구가 있는 데로 달려가 아직도 졸고 있는 그 친구의 멱살을 움켜쥐고 깨운 다음 목이 뜯겨나갈 만큼 지독하게 뺨을 때렸어요. 그것도 오른뺨, 왼뺨, 오른뺨, 왼뺨, 왕곡으로. 그 후로 그 친구 수학을 제일 잘하게 됐어요.
The young cop let out a disbelieving puff of smoke and said, "What?" I said, "After those slaps in the face, he went to the hospital, complaining of a terrible headache. They found out his brain waves were scrambled." The young cop muttered, "Kim slap will do that to you." The headaches went away after a week, and all of a sudden, he could solve all those algebra and geometry problems that he couldn't before. The same kid that used to say 4 times 9 is 28. Are you serious? It's true, I answered. Not only was he able to solve junior high-level problems, he could do high school-level problems and came to be called the biggest genius since the school's founding. I heard he's working on proving Fermat's theorem in high school now. What is that? Is it harder than quadratic equations? Asked the cop. It's the difference between Little League and Major League. The young cop nodded like he was impressed. Sounds like your friend owes Kim-san big. Really? For slapping him silly? The cop said I should get going, put out a cigarette, rose to his feet with his cap in his hand. I stood up along with him. After patting me on the shoulder, the cop smiled a bit bashfully and said, "You should be like Fearsome Kim." then you'd have all kinds of women hanging all over you. I bowed my head and said, I'm sorry about earlier. The cop brought his mouth up to my ear and said, let's just keep that between us. I nodded, laughing. The cop gave me an embarrassed smile.
젊은 경찰은 어리 빠진 것처럼 입에서 용기를 토해내더니 그게 무슨 소리야? 하고 물었다. 나는 계속했다. 그렇게 지독하게 뺨을 얻어맞고 나서 머리가 몹시 아프다고 하면서 병원을 갔었어요. 그리고 뇌파가 일정하지 않다는 진단을 받았죠. 젊은 경찰은 김시손 씨에 있을 수 있는 일이지 라고 절절하게 중얼거렸다. 일주일 정도 지나자 두통은 나았는데 그 대신 그때까지 영 풀지 못했던 연립방정식이니 도형 문제를 술술 풀게 되었죠. 4구 28이라고 하던 녀석이 말입니다. 정말이야? 그럼 정말이죠. 나는 주저없이 대답했다. 그 후로 그 친구, 중학 수준의 문제는 말할 것도 없고 고등학교 수준의 문제까지 술술 풀어서 개교 이래 최고의 천재라고 불리게 되었어요. 지금은 고등학교에서 페르마의 정리에 도전하고 있답니다. 페르마의 정리라는 게 이참수보다 더 굉장한 거냐? 젊은 경찰이 그렇게 물었다. 리틀 리그하고 성인 리그만큼이나 차이가 나죠. 젊은 경찰은 하고 참 놀랍다는 듯 고개를 끄덕였다. 그럼 김 씨는 그 친구의 은인이겠네? 그럴까? 이제 그만 돌아가야지. 까딱하면 이라고 말하면서 젊은 경찰이 담배를 끄고 일어섰다. 나도 따라서 일어났다. 젊은 경찰은 내 어깨를 툭툭 치고서 약간 쑥스럽다는 듯 미소를 띠고 말했다. 너 공포의 김씨처럼 되라. 그러면 여자는 얼마든지 다가오는 법이야. 나도 약간 고개를 숙이고 아까는 죄송했습니다 하고 사과했다. 젊은 경찰은 입을 내 귀에 갖다 대고 그건 우리 둘만의 비밀이야 라고 말했다. 나는 웃으면서 고개를 끄덕였다. 젊은 경찰은 겸연쩍게 미소 지었다.
It's so good to hear different languages.
Yes.
And I would like to ask Takami, why did you choose this passage?
Well, we chose a lot of passages and then we're told, well, we can't read all those passages, so this was just one of them. And I remember students telling me that they were intrigued by the light-hearted way in which this story is told, and this scene was kind of an exemplary scene.
Right. It's assault and battery here.
Yeah,
It's
but,
I mean,
but it's not.
But it's light. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's light. It's,
Yeah.
and the policeman and this
Yeah.
guy end up forming a weird kind of bond,
That's
and
right.
they have somebody they know in common, which was also interesting.
Yeah.
But the phrase in particular that drew the students to this scene was the part where he says, "I wish I had green skin." They were really drawn to that. Yeah, so that was why we chose this particular scene. And we also talked in our reading group about how we felt a little bit guilty about not thinking about these people who go through these ordeals in their everyday lives. Because a lot of the students, they hadn't really been introduced to these kind of people. They knew nothing about it, or they kind of knew about it, but they never gave a lot of thought to them.
Do you mean Zainichi?
Zainichi
I
in
see.
general, like the
Yeah.
Korean Japanese. I guess we share a bloodline, but we don't really know much about them. We don't really think a lot about them. And then we read the book and came to see Sugihara as somebody we could have been friends with.
Yeah, sure.
And it made us sad and guilty all at the same time.
Yeah.
But we didn't feel too sad because he seemed okay, you know? And we appreciated the light-hearted touch with which the book was written. So that was why we fell in love with almost all the scenes.
It's so sad.
Yes.
I
It is really
almost
sad.
cried.
Yeah.
I almost cried because I've never read. I have to admit that I didn't read this book, but as soon as I hear when you read the passages and also both languages, I was touched by both languages. Although it was translated in different times. I guess the Korean was translated before English was translated.
Yeah, this was translated early in the 2000s actually, and it's now out of print.
Yes.
Okay.
So I read this when I was really young, in my 20s.
When did you
revisiting
complete
it
the
now.
translation?
When did I do the translation?
Yeah.
It's this came out in 2018. I think I've been trying to publish it since 2011. So it's been a while. Yes.
And they liked how it was framed as a love story.
Yes,
He keeps
yes.
insisting, this is my love story. And then he has to talk about his family history,
Yeah.
which they thought was really, really a good rhetorical strategy used by the writer.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was fun. And we were wondering.
And it's mirrored by Sakurai later, when she refuses to give her identity, and then
Right,
her love is predicated on also her family identity,
right.
and limitations of that love also family identity. Yeah.
Are there, so the students chose many different passages.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit about what those other passages?
Oh, right, okay. I have to actually look them up. I have them right here.
I know one was the hotel scene where Sugihara and Sakurai went to the hotel, and
Right,
that's where he exposed his ethnic identity to her.
right.
And then ended up breaking the relationship.
Right.
Yes.
It's
So
from
that's obviously, major
117.
climax in the novel.
Yeah. And the thing that struck our students the most was how Sugihara didn't seem too fazed, I guess, when he heard his girlfriend talk about how her father told her Korean and Chinese people have tainted blood. They felt that he wasn't surprised.
Unfortunately,
As
not
if
surprised.
he's heard this many times before.
Yeah.
So that made them feel really bad and
Right.
sad.
And then there was I think you also picked out Jonghyun's.
Oh yes, because we loved him.
Jonghyun's death.
Yes, we love Jonghyun, don't we?
Everybody loves
Yes.
Jonghyun. Yeah.
And then there was another passage about.
Oh, and they were also struck hard by the part where he talks about DNA.
Yes, the mitochondrial DNA.
Yeah? Really?
Because it was a
A funny story.
really long speech.
And but he sets it up so he obviously wants to have the stage, right? So he's like, here, I'm going to tell the most interesting story. And then it comes up this nerdy biology information, right? And it was like, why the hell are we talking about this?
Because
Yes,
he wants to convince everyone.
Yes.
There is no
Yes.
reason for us to be discriminating against anybody.
Yeah,
right?
so Sugihara, the culturally liberal one among this cult, all these other people trying to force a particular identity on him.
Yes. And it's true. He's quite, he fights with his fists, but he's also quite well read.
He's a nerd. He's a nerd. Absolute nerd. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
One of the things I
He's Yangachi as well. Translate Yangachi. I don't know. How can you translate? Bully, but bully doesn't quite capture it. Like a young guy that likes fast cars, fast women, smokes, does drugs, and dresses extremely fashionably, tries to present a good image to the world.
A bad boy?
And a bad boy. Bad boy. Yeah, bad boy. Is the-
bad boy.
Yeah. Yeah, there we go. He's a bit of a Yangachi, right?
I mean, I can't believe the native speaker of
I couldn't think of a word.
translate Yangachi for us. That was hilarious.
But there's a lot of words like that, right?
Yes.
Like, how do you translate senpai? You can't do it. There's no
Upperclassman.
upperclassman means somebody who's you know, just happens to have a high rank in their school. It doesn't mean somebody that you must show respect to because they are older than you.
Okay.
Right? So it's not there's no really good way.
Equivalent,
Yeah. I did like Upperclassmen. That was a great translation though. That was the best you could come up with, I think. The best of possible worlds. Yeah. It doesn't quite get the cultural impact. Bad Boy's good though.
Yeah, Bad Boy is okay, I think.
I think it is really important to read this kind of diaspora literature or immigrant literature or multicultural literature because it helps us to see beyond ourselves.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
And beyond the lines that somebody have drawn on the land.
Right.
Because that's his father's message, right?
Yes.
It's just arbitrary.
Right. I love his father's ambivalence to the whole idea of nationality, right? And it's just a license you can buy with enough money.
Right.
You know, and in fact, that's pretty much the case. You know, even in our present world system, if you have enough money, I mean, if you have $500,000, you can invest it in Korea, and you can become a Korean citizen, right? Doesn't matter. Right, and Switzerland the same way. You have probably $1 million, and you live there for 10 years. You can get Swiss citizenship. There's many countries around the world where that's true. So I realized, wow, so he has this kind of ambivalence to the whole idea of nationality. But I think that's mirrored, right, by current world politics, where now we're living in an era where major corporations sometimes have more power than individual nation states.
Right.
And so it becomes a real question mark over, you know, what do we make of ethnicity?
Yeah. But yeah, I love that that is the overarching message, right? That Sugihara's father is trying to really impart to his son.
Yes.
First of all, I love the relationship between the father and the son.
Yeah.
They're so physical.
They are. And for me, as an American, as a Japanese American, oftentimes I have my own stereotypes about what Japanese literature is or Asian literature is. And just in my experiences, I felt that there was a kind of a stereotype that I encountered often in Japanese literature and Asian literature where the father tends to be sort of absent in the family. And oftentimes the stereotype is very strict and doesn't speak very much and holds his emotions very much, right? So that's my stereotype. But I really love that this father sort of played around with that brushed, kind of pushed back that stereotype, and he's always there. Right, he's there, and sometimes violent, right? But he has very important lessons to teach his son, and so I found that relationship very, very touching. And there's a line in the book where Sugihara says, sometimes all I want is my father and mother in my life, and that's all. That would be enough for me. And I found that really, really sort of touching.
We loved his awesome line. How do I read this? It's in Spanish. Do you read Spanish?
Sure.
I don't want to mess it up.
No soy coreano, ni japonés, soy un nómada desarrollado, which means I am not Korean, I am not Japanese, I am a nomad without boundary. Desarrollado, I think it's without boundary. Not without boundary. That's not a good. Sorry, Spanish speakers. Look it up later. Do you know what it is?
I think I translated it differently.
Ah, okay.
I think I translated it as rootless
and vagabond.
Rootless and
vagabond.
Yeah, that's right.
That appeared in the Japanese edition in Spanish originally as well?
Yes.
Okay.
But the Spanish was different, so we had to kind of localize it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been written like katakana script or something.
Well, and we were really, really devastated by Jonah's death because it didn't need to happen, right? It was an accident.
So bizarre.
It was an accident. But he had to step up and do his part because it could have been something else. It could have been a hate crime. It could have been.
Right.
So that, I mean, he died because he was a righteous person,
Yes.
trying to do the right thing.
That's right.
Yes, yeah.
And it felt the more tragic because the perpetrator, who turned out not to be the perpetrator, he was just trying to, I don't know, rack up the courage to say,
I love you to a
like
girl."
you to a girl.
Yeah.
So that was really devastating, and we had high hopes for Jung-il, you
Yes,
know.
of course. Right.
So it felt like
He
it
was
wasn't
going.
just
He was.
Jung-il
He
who
was.
died.
He was. No, I like. I mean, I liked it from a literary perspective though, because he was the star figure of the Zionist community, right? He was going to do great things,
and he was
he
a
had
new
this
generation. who was
and he had this
going to-
tremendously powerful sense of self.
Yes.
I have this skill to offer to the
Mhm.
world. You have that skill to offer to the world. He told Sugihara.
Mhm.
And in this way, you do your thing, I do my thing. We can
Lift up the community
lift up
together.
the whole community together. Yeah.
Mm.
So he had that. So it was like the death of a vision.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Jung-il's death.
Yeah.
It was the death of hope for that Zionist community.
Yeah.
So sad.
Mhm. We could talk about the book all day,
Yeah.
but we should also talk about translation because
Yes.
they have questions.
Oh, okay.
Translation. Topic of the day.
I mean, because look at the title of our event.
Yes. It is about
We-
translation.
Yeah, we have to ask questions about translation.
Sure.
So, would you like to?
I will ask a question first because we talk about the scene that Jung-il died, and I also said about this scene because always good people, like the hero, died at the end, and it makes me really sad that why doesn't we end it happily? So that was really sad scene. And while I'm reading this, I have a question that in this scene, Jung-il is attacked by a 17-year-old high school student who the writer simply refers to as he. So I am curious as to what you thought about this and what are your thoughts on why Kaneshiro Kazuki gave no name to this character and what the student without a name symbolizes. So,
Wow.
and also,
Great question.
yeah, also I would like to hear about what you focus on the most while you're translating this.
Well, I mean, you're asking a really wonderful and complicated question. And I feel like, to some extent,
Yeah.
we don't know what Kaneshiro's intentions were for that scene, right? And I can guess, I can interpret, and that would be my own reading. But I feel like that scene is open to many different interpretations. For example, I mean, perhaps he chose not to give that character a name because maybe he wants to say that it could be anybody, right? It can be anybody in that situation, right? Or it could mean that he simply didn't want to give a person who would do a violent thing like this a name. Right? So it could be, both sort of positive and negative reason, but it's entirely up to you, right?
Yeah.
Did you have a feeling? Like, what did you think?
I also thought that this he symbolizes everyone, and including me, because if I just adjust the scene that I was in that situation, maybe I could be the person who protect the girl. So
Yes.
I thought that it symbolizes everyone, that everyone has a normal stories and normal people can be a hero and normal people can be like member of the tragic stories characters.
Yeah, nice.
That
That's
was
really,
sad.
that's a great reading.
Yeah.
What was your second question?
Second question?
Yeah.
Like while you're translating the scenes,
Yeah.
what
Did you focus
what did
on
you
the
focus the most about this scene?
Just trying to think. It was a long time ago. I mean, mostly, if I can speak very sort of generally, when I translated this book first of all, I loved Sugihara's voice, the way he tells us the story. And in many ways, as you said, it's very funny, he's very sarcastic, he's rebellious. And in a way, I'm sarcastic, I'm rebellious. And so capturing that sort of voice was kind of easy. It was really easy for me. I don't know, maybe it's, I'm just, I'm a girl from New Jersey. I'm really sarcastic. So that part was very easy. However, that voice, underlying that voice, is a very vulnerable voice at the same time, right?
Sure.
You can tell that even though he says these sort of things to act all mighty and strong and fighting, he's also very sensitive and he feels things, and you can hear that sort of underlying vulnerability in his voice, and that was the part that I really wanted to do justice, because that was this very special part about his voice. So that was the thing that I tried to do as much as I can. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question.
日本語でしてもいいですか？
はい、どうぞ。
小説に登場する先輩やオタクみたいな単語は、西洋圏では聞き慣れない単語だと思います。特定の文化圏だけ使用される単語を翻訳する過程で、単語をそのまま使用することと理解が簡単にできるように説明することの中でどれがいいですか？
So she's asking a question about how do you make a decision about whether to translate a specific word or retain the original Japanese word in English. For example, you were saying earlier about senpai and kohai, right? So those words, I think it kind of depends on who you're translating for, right? And oftentimes, senpai and kohai, if you watch anime, and you listen to music and things like that. Yeah, right? So you would know what senpai means. You would know what kohai means. And so we decided that we're going to keep it. We're going to keep it, and then if I felt that it was necessary to do a little bit of explanation somewhere, I'll stick it in there. But it's really interesting because of the prevalence of Japanese culture and with anime and Netflix and Korean culture too, right? With Netflix and you're, as a translator, you're having to do less of it. I was just talking to a Korean translator friend, and he was saying that one of his books, he wanted to translate into English Banchan. Yeah, but his editor said, no, we understand Banchan. Let's
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
these sort of
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My sister used that word in conversation to me. She has never lived in Korea.
Oh.
And I was like, how do you know that? It's shocking.
Yeah, it's become part of
It's part of the English lexicon.
the English
That's right.
lexicon. Yeah. So you kind of make sort of decisions. It's kind of difficult too, because you have to kind of imagine who your audience is, and there's no one audience.
Right.
You're always thinking about many different diverse audiences. So you try to make your best educated guess. And oftentimes you have to, if you use the Japanese, and if you feel like, oh, maybe they will not understand it, you kind of give help. For example, there's taiko drums. So taiko. So in Japanese we say taiko. That's what drums mean. But when you translate it into English, we say taiko drums to help you understand that what taiko means.
Right.
So those types of things. Yeah. That's a great question. ありがとうございます。
You were also wondering when you wrote Aboji.
Oh,
Was
yeah.
that because it was Aboji in the original?
Yes.
So they use
What you in the original?
a very formal word for father.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not appa, right?
But is more
Familiar.
familiar. Yeah. Intimate.
Maybe it sounds like so normal question, but I really want to ask you, what made you become a translator? And what are your goals and dreams as a translator?
It's the first on topic. That's a great question.
So you're asking how did I become a translator? I'm kind of a late bloomer. So I've only been translating for about 12 years maybe. Not very long. I started in my 30s. And ever since I was a little girl, I always wanted to be a writer. And so I write things, and I write screenplays. As an 8-year-old, I used to, this is kind of embarrassing, but as an 8-year-old, I used to write fan fiction. So if you find TV shows you like, and I like these characters, they should get together. I'm gonna I'll write a romance. So that's how I started writing things. And that gave me so much pleasure. And so I sort of grew up thinking that I was going to be a writer, and it's difficult being a writer. and so I thought I wanted to think of a way where maybe if I wasn't going to be a writer, if there were other career choices that would allow me to do the things I love, which is to write. And so translation was something that that was presented to me. This is accident, right? I happen to have 2 languages that I know. I happen to love reading, so I had a good sort of literary knowledge, which is necessary to be a translator. So I had those things. So a friend introduced me to a job translating manga. So that was my first job, translating manga. And it was kind of a romance between 2 high school kids in Japan, and it was kawaii this, kawaii that, and as a 30-year-old, I'm like, but it was really fun. It was so much fun, and I got to be I got to be younger again, right? So that's how I started as a translator, and as I became more practiced and had more experience as a translator of manga, I eventually started to translate novels. Yeah, and then in the beginning, I would usually be asked, different publishers will say, hey, would you like to translate this? So they would be giving me jobs. And that's how I worked for a very long time. And then eventually, when I became a little bit more established, I was able to choose my own projects and say, if I read something in Japanese and I really, really love it, I can translate it. And that's a lovely thing. It's such a powerful and it's such a beautiful thing to be able to do, right? I mean, if you have a book in Korean that you really, really love, right?
My favorite Korean writer's name is Gu Byung-mo. It's a Wizard Bakery. Cool.
I don't.
If it's been translated into English, we'll look it up, and if it is, we'll send you the link.
So, imagine, if you have that book and you love it, right? And you have the power to translate that into English, right?
Well,
they will work on it.
So that's kind of where I am now. And you asked what my dreams are.
Yes.
I just want to continue to find books that I really, really love, because you spend 2 or 3 years working on a book, finding a publisher, and promoting the publication of it. So you are entering a relationship, a very deep relationship with an author and a book. So you really have to love the book that you choose to translate. And so that is such a privilege. So I would like to continue to, a kind of a secret pleasure is to find an author that maybe not a lot of people know, and I get to discover.
Introduce that person.
Yeah, and I get to discover to introduce it to the world, right? That's such a special thing.
Yeah.
And so the time that I'm translating it and nobody knows that I'm translating, it's kind of my little secret. You know, hey, I'm going to give this to the world, right?
Oh, that must feel so
It's a wonderful thing.
awesome.
Yeah, and any sort of success that the author achieves, right? It's just a wonderful thing.
I have a follow-up question then. What is it about Korean Japanese writers that made you want to translate them? And what drew you to this particular work? I mean, he has other novels, right? So why go?
So I encountered it probably when you did. This was published, the original was published in 2000, and then not too long after that, the film,
Right.
the movie. Have you
Which
seen the
they
film?
watched.
Did you watch it?
Yeah.
Good, right? So to be honest, I can't remember which I saw or read first, but you know, it was 20 years ago, but I remember just being really stunned by the story, and it's a love story, but it's not a love story. It's about identity, and it's about in-betweenness.
Yes.
About if you are a child of diaspora, right? You have very sort of complex feelings about who you are, who you belong to, where do you belong to. And overarching theme of this book is in-betweenness, right? When he was born in Japan, he lives in Japan, but he doesn't quite feel accepted in Japan. And he goes to Korea, right? And he goes and he's Korean, but he doesn't quite feel accepted in Korea. That in-betweenness is something, as a Japanese American, I experienced when I was a kid. And so it was not just that of course I appreciate this as a literary work, but I felt something very emotional with this book. I felt that if I read this as a smaller, as a teen, right? I felt like my voice, or maybe my identity, is being represented in some way. In this, I wished I had read this when I was 17. I wished I had read this when I was 17. So I felt like, first of all, I will translate it. I'm going to do it. And then the current book that is going to be out next year.
Ginny's Puzzle.
Yes, Ginny's Puzzle. And I think it's also translated in Korean as well.
Yes, I finished it last night.
Oh, okay. By Chesil. And similar, right?
Yes.
Experiences of in-betweenness. That whole novel is sort of an allegory of diaspora. She doesn't belong in Japan, and kind of a sad story that she actually has to leave in order to find her home, right? She couldn't find it in Japan. But it is about her moving to Hawaii, to Oregon, to find her home. And so, again, those types of stories just touch me deeply. As a teacher, am I talking too much?
No, we love it.
Why you're here.
As a teacher, I also feel like I'm also thinking in terms of what I can teach, right? And I love to teach these types of books, multicultural literature, literature of the diaspora. So, as much as I can, I would like to put out more of those types
Please
of books.
do, because I'm thinking of actually including this in my syllabus.
Yeah.
Because I teach a multicultural class. We're currently reading Jean Reese's Weizsägers Sea, which is also about in-betweenness.
Yes.
So they actually understand what you... We've been talking about this whole semester.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Awesome.
또 질문.
So I have one more question.
Yeah.
I am curious about translating works of living authors. Like Hazuki is still alive.
Yes.
So I'm guessing that you could have conducted him if you wanted to. So were there moments when you wanted to call him or ask questions? Like were there phrases or sentences that you wanted to discuss with the writer or ask his thoughts on translating those parts?
That's a great question.
I think with every book, the relationship with the author is different. With this particular author, he pretty much said, here's the book, please translate it. Yeah, here's the book, please translate it. So I didn't get a chance to consult with him very much. Although sometimes I felt like maybe I'd like to. But he said, here. And so in some ways that kind of, that he entrusted me with, with this enormous task. I felt like, oh, okay, he's trusting me. And so you just do your best and do what you can. On the other hand, this book, Ginny's Puzzle, I was able to contact Chesil often, and I was able to ask her many questions. And because of the story is semi-autobiographical, so lots of the experiences that you read in the book happened to her. And so she had some very personal things to tell me, and there were specific reasons why she wanted to keep certain details because it happened to her. And so I wanted to do to honor, to respect those wishes, and so that relationship worked out very, very well. And she was able to keep the things she wanted to keep, and I was able to sort of also find ways to translate the book in a way that it did justice to the book.
Yes. Thank you. もう一回日本語で。どうぞ。今考えたときにまた翻訳したい場面がありますか？もしそうならその理由は何でしょうか？例えば今もう一度翻訳すればよくできると思うんだとか、ここはもうちょっと頑張ってみたいとか、そんな部分があったら。
That's a great question. She's asking if I can translate this book over again. Are there parts where I feel like I could do a better job? Or are there parts where I feel like I want that line back? Yes.
It's much like a writing task, right?
Yeah. There are some. Actually, the Spanish, the nos, that one. That translation is not good. I think I translated it as
I'm not Korean.
rootless vagabond, and I wish I could take back vagabond.
Yeah.
There were indications where like maybe I might have been able to translate that as a rootless blade of grass, but it didn't have the nomadic aspect of it, and that's why I went with vagabond. But I'm not sure if I would translate that yet.
Sure.
But I mean, gosh, yes. If I read this again very, very carefully, I might be like, right? There might be some places where I feel like, oh, maybe I could have done that better. But you know what? You have to let it go.
Yes.
You have to let it go. But thank you for that question.
I think in the Korean translation, she said a floating weed.
Floating weed.
Like weed that lives on water, so
it
the
kinda
roots
drips.
are not like in the
Not rooted.
Yeah, it's not rooted. It just floats.
That's a good translation.
Yeah.
So rootlessness.
Yeah,
Rootlessness is the point.
yeah. So
Yes.
she really wanted to
Yeah.
get to
Right.
that. 부초.
Oh, I have
And
a question.
the point is though that Sugihara has too many roots.
That's
Isn't
right.
That's the irony, right?
That's
That's
right.
the problem. That's what caused all this
That's right.
issues. Anyways, so what was you to say?
I have a question. Can I ask a question? You have read the Korean as well?
Yeah.
Were there things in reading the English and the Korean where you felt like, oh, that's interesting, the differences?
Ooh, I have one. I was waiting to ask.
Yeah.
Because it was really
it felt really different because in the Korean version, the senpai, the guy who runs really fast, he calls Sugihara Cropper. Cropper, as in horse's ass. And in the English translation, you just said, he called me crazy. So I was wondering, why did you get rid of cropper? I mean, it's an English word.
Cropper, yeah.
Yeah, cropper. And it seems to fit the character really well.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
Okay.
Do you know the
It's
page number?
41.
Page 41.
Yes, okay, so in Japanese, it was kurupa.
Kurupa.
Yes, kurupa. Because I don't know, you're right, I mean, it's not an equivalent, right, crazy? Kurupa is like, I think it's, part of it's like political correctness, I think. I could have said, what could I have said?
Horse's ass.
Horse's ass.
Or
But
cropper,
maybe
I
that's-
guess.
No, kurupa means like crazy.
Yeah.
Like, the un-PC word is like touched in the head.
Right.
미친놈.
Just
Incorrect.
to
Okay, interesting. That's fascinating.
Just to give you some context, I mean, in my book, in Korean, the translator just said 크로퍼 and put in English cropper, like the English word.
Interesting.
Yeah, she just wrote in English.
I didn't understand cropper until you gave me the Korean word 마롱무늬. And I was like, oh, I understand what that means.
Okay, so I had to look it up.
I had
And
to
it
learn
turned
the
out,
Korean.
I found in the dictionary that cropper means horse's ass,
Yeah.
and it seemed to fit really well with the
Yeah.
character because, you know, when you hit a horse's ass, it'll run straight, right? Without looking back or without looking around.
Okay.
And it kind of seems to represent this character who is
Yes.
so hot-headed and so
Yes.
ready to run.
Right.
Remember the train
Yeah.
Yeah,
he
The
outrun-
suicidal game of chicken.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I was wondering, but
Interesting.
yes, yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. Although there were probably, it was hard to translate that one.
Can I ask one question? So many cultural references to everybody from Miles Davis to Lou Reed to. Is that? Do you know? I know you say you're a Jersey girl, but do you know if that's a common feature of Japanese life or Zainichi life? Or I was just overwhelmed. I mean, this guy knows more pop culture than I do, and I'm an American, right? I was just overwhelmed.
I think, to some extent, I think it's the author.
Okay.
That's his interest.
Okay.
But also, I mean, I love that you touched upon that. Because, yeah, he does, for a 17-year-old boy, he's like an old soul. He loves Miles Davis, he knows Malcolm X,
Yes.
Bruce
And La
Springsteen.
Traviata.
Right.
He goes to operas and
Very
fun.
old. And
Yeah.
by the way, I mean, this was set in 2000. I mean, it was 2000, so
Yeah.
it maybe wasn't as old, back then. But, but yeah, he's definitely an old soul. And one of the things that I really, to answer your question, no. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
That's atypical.
Okay.
It's atypical, but I think.
Well, Sugihara is atypical.
Yes.
Right.
And I think that characterization really sort of impressed me because I felt like maybe perhaps the author was trying to say, here's this boy who lives in Japan and he doesn't know who he is. He's trying to figure out how to deal with discrimination and sort of prejudiced ideas, and he's trying to find knowledge that's going to give him strength
Right.
to fight back against those ideas. And what I really love about him is that he's drawing upon not just Korean influences, but Japanese and
Yeah.
Miles Davis and Bruce Springsteen and Malcolm X. Like, all his influences are very multicultural.
Right.
And in
Mark
a
Chagall.
way, yeah, in a way, he's sort of already in his head envisions what Japanese society ought to be, more inclusive of those types of,
Right.
yes, borderless, more.
Yes, and in fact, he and Sakurai mentioned the fact that they love this one Brahms sonata, but they have no idea where Brahms comes from.
Right.
Which is
and,
bizarre.
And who cares, right?
Right, and
it
who
shouldn't
cares?
matter.
Yeah.
It shouldn't matter.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's that Shakespeare, right? The
Oh, yes.
Romeo and Juliet.
Mhm.
That's the beginning.
Yeah.
What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Yeah. The names in this novel are pretty important. Yeah. Did you want to say something about that? You know, for example, and I'm kind of going back to what you were saying about the important. Why didn't he name that character? And I think names are very, very important. For example, Sugihara withholds his real name from Sakurai. Sakurai withholds her name from, right? And they're trying to, when they first meet, they're saying, well, names don't really matter, right? Who cares? And of course, it really does, right? And he reveals his name, and then she reveals her name, and Sakurai is, Sakura is,
Oku.
yes, cherry
Cherry blossom.
blossom, right? And so it's got that flower name, and then it kind of, it's a refrain to the Shakespeare, the
Right.
rose, right? And then her first name is Tsubaki, which is camellia, another flower. And so, which is why she doesn't want to, right? And so names are very important here. Jongmyo, obviously, he chooses to keep his Korean name, whereas Sugihara passes, he takes on a Japanese name, right? And so he's trying to kind of blend in, right?
Pass.
Yeah, pass for Japanese. And then Sugihara's father is named Hideyoshi.
Ah,
Right. Yes.
right. Oh,
The
right.
emperor.
His ring
The
name
emperor,
was
Hideyoshi.
and I remember him saying, "I was hated for that."
So his boxing coach or something like that is the one who gives him that name, Hideyoshi. And as you know, Toyotomi Hideyoshi is the feudal warlord
That's
who invaded Korea.
Korea.
Right, so, you know, imagine that, right? That indignity and of being named that. So names are really,
We talked about that scene where they both reveal their names in one of our meetings, and they discussed how, although they give similar reasons as to why they hid their names, the weight of the problems that caused or encouraged, I guess, them to withhold their names are really different.
That's right.
yes.
Because
Weight is very
no, Sakurai, she just withholds her name because it sounds too Japanese. It
Yes.
sounds maybe like
Ajamane.
she's a country girl or
Yeah,
something.
Yeah.
Old-fashioned
Yeah.
name. It's
Yeah.
embarrassing. But
Yes.
for Sugihara, it was for a whole different reason. He
Yes.
knew
Yeah.
that he was going to
He
be
knew the risk.
rejected.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that sort of counterpoint is really, really interesting.
I have one. I used to read a lot of Japanese works translated into Korean when I was young, to the point where I couldn't decide whether I'm a fan of, for example, Yoshimoto Banana, or the person who worked on a lot of her works. The translator's name was Kim Nanju. And I was confused. Do I like Kim Nanju or do I like Yoshimoto Banana? Kind of.
Yes.
I feel like I'm also going to become your fan.
Also.
Right.
So,
Yeah, this
Yeah.
was also
Yeah, same.
translated by the same person.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, do you have a favorite translator?
yeah.
I mean, I know translators. I don't know. I mean, that's an important question because right now, especially now, there's kind of a campaign going on about insisting that translators' names be recognized on the cover of any book in English. Because a lot of the big publishers, many of the independent publishers do this as a norm. But the big publishers tend not to do it, and they have sort of kind of sketchy reasons why they don't. But many of the translators now, because there is greater visibility, people know translators' names. And some readers will choose, oh, they translated that, I'm going to buy it.
Yes.
So they're choosing books by who translated it. And so that's a very compelling reason to
Yes.
to put it here. So
I mean, I used to do the same. I would,
sure.
find two different translations, and I would, of course, go for the translator
Yeah.
whose works
I-
I've already read.
But you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I think you're right, and I think yes, the translator has to be recognized. But some authors work with their translator closely, like Czeslaw Milosz and Robert Haas. It's such a tight partnership that they wouldn't dare put something into the world unless both of their names are on it.
So, I mean, if you can form that sort of partnership. Haruki Murakami has a team of translators.
Lucky him.
Yeah. And so, and as you know, I mean, we're talking about the Nobel Prize for Literature. When we think about world literature, right? For any sort of author or work to be recognized as part of this sort of canon or catalog of world literature, they have to be translated in English. That's very important. Whether we like it or not, English is the sort of the mode, right? The language that we need to be translating into to achieve some sort of global recognition. And so the translator's job is so important because you are curating. You are, by choosing to translate something and you translate it into English, that's how they will become recognized, right?
Curate is a really cool word.
Yeah. So really important. And I've totally forgotten. You've asked a question.
Oh,
I've forgotten.
do you have a favorite translator? That's good. As you said, I should read more.
I really should. I mean, I like Emily Wilson. She's, she retranslated the Odyssey. And she sort of found some sort of like misogynies of previous male translators. And she sort of kind of did her own translation, which is very well received.
Thanks. I will look into that. And also, we will be waiting for your new book to be published so that we can read it. We've now become your fans and fans of the works that you've curated.
Thank
you. Because they wouldn't have picked this up. This no longer is in the market.
Yeah.
So if you hadn't given the world this English translation, they may have never met Sugihara.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it has translation has a resurrection quality to it.
Yeah, seriously.
That's fascinating.
And I was so happy because I read the book first when I was their age.
Is there something that you have learned in your very short time here in Korea that has made you think about this novel in a different way? I know you've been kind of on program, so not really a chance for me to sink in, but I'm just curious. Not yet.
I really can't speak to that quite yet, but I imagine that I will.
Yeah. She's only been on the quarantine for a week and a half.
Oh yeah.
So it's too early to ask.
But I'm working on a translation right now. I'm actually in the process of editing it, and so one of my primary goals while I'm here is to edit it and get some expertise in terms of language help. This particular book that I'm working on now is, again, diaspora literature. It has to do with a group of 20 refugees, not refugees. The book follows their journey by train from Hakodate, from Hokkaido, all the way down to Nagasaki.
Anyways, far south.
From which they will either choose to stay in Japan or they will take the boat back to Busan. And they have to make decisions.
They have to decide.
They have to decide.
Fascinating. I'm gonna read it.
What's the title? I am looking for.
I'm not quite sure yet.
Oh,
I'm not quite sure yet.
Title, yeah. What's the original?
The
title?
direct translation would be Travelers of 100 Years, but it might change, the title might change a little bit. But it has Hokkaido dialect, it has Ainu, it has Korean, it has Japanese, and it has Aomori dialect, and
Wow.
different, right? And so,
Japanese science.
yeah. and
How
so-
do you translate dialects?
Wow. Ask her.
How do you do that? Do you use, I don't know, southern or how do you convey that to an English-speaking audience?
You kind of, but those are things that I'm kind of working on, and So-yeon sometimes helps me with the Korean.
Oh.
Yeah.
Venom.
Venom.
How would you translate Venom? English.
Outside.
Venom? No, it kind of means danger.
Oh, see, I didn't know the word. I didn't know the word. Okay.
Venom.
Okay.
But it
Hard,
kind of
right?
has a hostile connotation to it.
Yeah.
Wow, how would you do that? I'm not sure. What was your answer?
I said Japanese mustard.
Bastard.
Is that Japanese? Yeah, I guess that's the word.
And I don't know, I might just keep Venom and just put explanation.
Yeah, that
But-
could work.
But if you want to read something, you don't want to read a lot of
Yes.
notes, right? And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah. And this was marketed as a young adult lit, right? So I'm guessing that young readers would also
Yeah.
have watched a lot
Probably.
of
Yes.
animation.
Yeah. The young readers are much more.
Well versed. Well versed in Japanese
Yes.
culture.
Sure.
Yeah.
And they're becoming that way in Korean culture too.
But the original of this was not a YA. It was not.
Yeah,
a
it
young
wasn't,
adult.
and it wasn't marketed as such when it was translated here.
Oh,
either.
it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It's kind of has a kind of
It's
a.
got a cute cover.
Does Korean literature have a kind of a big YA sort of category?
It's been growing.
Okay.
It wasn't there when I was a teenager, wanting books appropriate for my age, but the market has grown.
Nice.
And they have special awards for YA literature.
Okay.
Because of the age of the main characters.
Makes sense, kind of. No need to categorize any book, but adults could still read this and have fun.
I read it and had fun. I'm 40.
Loads to think about
Absolutely.
and learn things
Absolutely.
from
I learned a
Sugihara.
lot. Yeah. It's great.
Do you have desire? Do you have interest in becoming translators?
Actually, I want to become a content marketer. But I was a child. When I was a child, I translated manga.
You did.
Yeah.
Oh.
So 일본어,
Uh-huh.
한국어에
Ah.
翻訳して
Nice.
ブログの皆さんに
Oh, wow. So you translated the things that you like?
Yeah.
But there are a lot of students in the department who are interested in becoming translators. So if you could give them some advice, that could be really helpful. What skill sets do you need, or what kind of a mindset should they have?
The most important qualities as a translator to have.
I mean, I think one of the most important is that you kind of have to be pretty well read in your source language, right? So for me, I'm working from, I'm sorry, target language, I'm sorry. So from, well, both, but I mean, especially in English, right? So I'm translating from Japanese into English, and so it really, really helps me that, you know, I took a degree in literature and I have a pretty well-rounded background in literature, and plus I love to read, and so I read a lot, and so, you know, those things kind of come in handy when you are asked to translate a specific genre of literature, like science fiction, and you have the sort of the conventions of that genre, right, and some vocabulary, you know, of that genre, and it makes it easier, right? Sometimes I'll be asked to do something and I have no background in it, and I have to study it. I have to read books and figure out, oh, this is how you write a thriller, or this is how you do a mystery, which is not something that I'm particularly strong in. I'm interested, but it's not something that I've read very much. And so you just kind of have to cram and just kind of internalize the vocabulary, internalize the language and the music, the mood, the atmosphere of that genre, and then you can sort of output, you know, the translation. So, you know, it's helpful to be well-read, read a lot, just be really passionate. Passionate about the work. One of the things I really love about translation is you get to play with words. You know, it's kind of like, imagine like a 10,000 piece puzzle, lots of pieces, right? And it's nothing but just kind of trying to figure out, like, okay, how does this fit? You know, it's like, oh, it's not this word, it's this word. And when you kind of fit that puzzle piece into that puzzle, it's like, oh yeah, that's very satisfying. It's really satisfying. And so I really enjoy that. I enjoy being able to find puzzle pieces that fit, and that satisfaction that I feel is like, ah. You know? And then when you finish, right, 10,000 pieces, that's quite an accomplishment. And so every day I get to work with puzzles. Yeah.
Read a lot, be passionate.
Yeah. You know, and you have to be, if you would like to be a professional translator, for me, I would say that maybe about 60% of what I do as a translator is translating. The other 40 is making connections and writing proposals and say, you have to buy my translation, and talking to people, pitching. You have to kind of market yourself and say, I want to translate this, can you buy it? Right? So, you know, those types of things. And so translation is, I mean, it's helpful if you like to do those things. I kind of quite enjoy connecting with publishers and just talking about books. And so, and that's, I think that's helpful. Yeah.
You like to connect?
Yeah, because when I was middle school student, we had a lot of events that meeting authors and translators. So I think I was very interested in about these authors and translation when I was a student, because I have a lot of experience to meet them. So that makes me growing to get into it. So
I see.
that experience that also make people and students like have a dream to be a translator and to be a writer. So I hope we have a lot of kind of events and experiences to the students. That's really good.
Great. There's, I mean, you know, do the students know about LTI?
I think some do, not all of them.
Okay. Because that's a pretty nice organization to be a part of. And they offer classes, and they really work at sort of nurturing translator, not just from English to Korean, but Korean to English, and both ways. So
We should send our students that way. Introduce them.
yeah, and not a lot of countries have that support. Japan used to have it, and then they They kind of cut it, yeah.
I was once told by this old translator that your mother tongue should always be the target language. And he said this in a classroom full of students working on translating Korean works into English. And we were so offended, but he was so adamant about it. He actually said, you are translating into the wrong target language.
Wow.
And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, yeah, you shouldn't say that.
Right.
But that should not hinder students from
Trying.
trying
Exactly.
or growing. I mean, that's a sort of a bias that those of us in the publishing industry want to eliminate because it affects me. You know, for example, I look like this, but my target language is English. Now, in America, they would not hesitate. They would say, "Oh, yes, of course you can look like this, and of course you can write well in English." However, in Japan, they have some kind of some, not everybody, but some publishers, many of those which are very powerful, think that if you want to translate Japanese into English, they must find a white American translator. There's some kind of assumption that they would do a better job than I would. And you know, that's not true.
No, it's not true at all. It's bizarre.
Right?
It's been around for some time.
Of course. Yeah.
So, translators and publishers, if you're listening, this is a myth that needs to be torn down. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And we talk about this a lot in America, in the U.S. among
Sure.
translators of color. Translators of color, we talk about this all the time. We're trying to break those assumptions.
Because the way the numbers go, who's going to benefit from that kind of a stereotype? Obviously, the majority, right?
Of course. And so, yeah, I was just watched a Zoom recording the other day about translators whose first language was Spanish, and they're now translating into English. So they are working from their first language to their second language.
Yes.
Yeah, to their second language. And, you know, it's tough because those assumptions
Right.
exist. Yes.
But I mean, authors would be killed off if, you know, Joseph Conrad didn't learn
Yes.
English until he was 25, for goodness
Right.
sake, right? And he becomes one of the world's best publishers, or one of the world's best novelists in
Yeah.
English.
Yeah.
I
We tried to.
Yeah. Hajin.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hajin, yeah.
Yeah.
And we failed in convincing him miserably, but I still stand by my idea.
Of course, of course. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
We can talk about this
All night.
all night until midnight. It's time for us to wrap up things.
Okay.
So, is there anybody to talk more in closing that you haven't covered before?
Thank you for bringing Grief into the world. That's, I think, our sentiment.
Yes, we're very, very nice.
Thank you very much for reading.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We still feel good to have this connection we have today. So we hope to continue this network or partnership.
Yes.
Great.
Call us at any time.
That's right.
Thank you.
안녕하세요. 저는 가톨릭대학교 영어영문학부에 재학 중인 지금 4학년 최희연입니다. 저희는 동아리를 작당 모의라고 부르거든요. 저희가 읽고 싶은 책이나 영화 또는 그냥 작품들, 의미 있는 작품들을 하나씩 골라서 그걸 보고 2주마다 한 번씩 저희가 줌으로 각자 인상 깊었던 부분들이나 아니면 같이 토의하고 싶은 질문들을 생각해와서 이야기 나누곤 하거든요. 그래서 사실 작당 모의 하면 뭔가 문제를 일으킬 것 같고 그런 건데 저희는 뭔가 좋은 것들을 그러니까 같이 이야기 나누는 모임이라고 생각하시면 될 것 같습니다. 네, 저는 한국에서만 공부를 했고 또
언어가 되게 다양하잖아요. 영어라는 언어에 되게 흥미를 많이 가지고 있었어서 어렸을 때부터 좀 관심 있게 공부하고 또 재미있게 놀이처럼 배웠던 것 같아요. 저희 두 번의 만남을 가져서 교수님과 그리고 다른 작당모의 친구들 학우님들과 같이 토의도 하고 또 질문할 것들도 정리를 해서 오늘 이렇게 이 자리를 성사할 수 있게 되었습니다. 감사합니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 가톨릭대학교 재학 중인 영어영문과 17학번 백지은입니다. 되게 좋은 기회라고 생각을 해서 일단 참여하게 되었고요. 제가 첫 번째 참가자였어요.
신청을 하신 거예요?
네네네. 그리고 다른 문화권 분들을 만날 수 있다는 사실이 너무 좋아서 한국어 말고도 다른 언어로 소통하는 게 그게 저는 되게 좋아가지고 한번 경험해보고 싶어서 참여하게 되었습니다. 네, 언어 배우는 거 좋아하고 프랑스어도 교양 수업으로 배운 적도 있고 그냥 다른 나라 언어를 배우는 것 자체에 되게 흥미를 많이 가지고 있어요. 일단 제가 제2전공으로 스토리텔링을 하고 있거든요. 그래서 각 나라의 문화 콘텐츠들을 좀 익혀가지고 그거를 해외로 수출하거나 그 다음에 또 수입을 해오거나 하는 일을 하고 싶습니다.
그러면 뭐 컨텐츠 쪽 일을 하고 싶으신 거네요.
네네. 제작 같은 것도 하고 일단 작가님이랑 질문을 1대1로 하고 또 답변을 듣는 게 제일 좋았던 것 같습니다. 네, 감사합니다.
네, 고맙습니다.
저는 가톨릭대학교 영어영문학부 20학번 장하영입니다. 저는 사실 이 책의 내용과 관련된 주제를 잘 모르고 있었는데 그런 주제에 대해서 책도 읽어보고 영화도 읽어보고 이게 참 문화라는 것도 그렇고 평소에 생각해보지 못했던 것에 대해서 생각해볼 수 있어서 되게 저에게는 인상 깊었습니다. 제가 가장 좀 흥미로웠던 게 제가 읽었던 부분에서 다가올 사람은 다가오고 다가오지 않을 사람은 다가오지 않는다고 했었는데 그냥 원문으로는 good person은 온다 그러고 좋은 사람은 따라올 것이고 안 좋은 사람은 안 따라올 것이라는 것에서 이게 역시 원문과 또 그런 영어와 또 한국과 다양한 그 번역본들을 서로 비교하면서 읽는 게 참 이해하기도 좋은 것 같다고 느꼈습니다. 저는 사실 솔직히 말씀드리자면 요즘 참 그런 과에 대한 되게 생각이 많은 고민을 하고 있는데 이번 행사를 통해서 이렇게 정말 대단하신 분들과 직접 옆에서 대화하시는 것도 듣고 또 제가 여기 설 수 있었던 것도 영어영문학부의 학생으로서 있었던 건데 이런 기회를 갖게 된 것도 정말 감사했습니다. 그래서 영어영문학부로서 좀 다양한 걸 개발해야겠다는 생각이 들었습니다. 스스로에게 부끄럽지 않은 사람이 되도록 하겠습니다.
기대할게요. 감사합니다. 네.